Good afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about the Kern High School District Board of Trustees meeting held on June 28th, 2021. So in attendance were 10 board members. 5 of the board members were the voted trustees. And the voted trustees were the president, who is Jeff Flores, the vice president, who is J. Brian Beatty. The clerk, one of the clerks is Cynthia Brakeman, and then clerk pro tem is Janice Graves, and the last voted trustee is David Manriquez. And this information can also be found on the Kern High School District website. So the school board meetings are held the first Monday of the month, with the exception of July of this year, which the July meeting was held June 28th because July 5th, the first Monday of July, was a holiday. And normally the meetings are held in the boardroom located at the EOC Administrative Building, Kern High School District, 5801 Sundale Avenue in Bakersfield, California. And closed sessions are held prior to the open session, and they are held in conference room A. So Kern High School District represents 26 schools total, 18 comprehensive schools, 8 alternative schools, and with over 40,000 students. Okay, and generally the format, as you can see in the live stream videos, is they do a town hall style meeting in which speakers stand up in front of the board members representing the board and present their comments, present their presentations to the board members themselves. Okay, so for me, this is my first time actually sitting on a school board meeting. Mostly because A, I've never known where they were, and B, my daughter is finally old enough for me to really start getting involved in the politics of school. So because of my daughter not having been old enough and me not actually knowing what was going on with the school districts themselves, I never attended one, so this was kind of a new experience for me. But I also, as I've said many times in a lot of my writing, it does remind me of my military meetings where they would bring, I'm going to give you a term because I was Navy. He was the chief of naval operations, and he's kind of a very, his name kind of is self-explanatory. He's kind of a bigwig. And this reminded me of those meetings where they would bring us in, where he would come to a base, and then you as commands within the base would send sailors there to see him speak. And so it reminded me a lot of that, where we would watch him speak, and then at the end we would be able to present questions for him, and then he would answer our questions. So it reminded me very much of that, except with the difference of they probably have their questions planned out a little more so than we did. Okay, so at this board meeting, it was kind of interesting. So it opened up, they did recognition of some sports achievements that were received throughout the district. So they recognized the athletes and their coaches, and then they opened up for what was called the hearing of the citizens, in which they each citizen that spoke got a 3-minute time frame to speak. It was interesting because they only had 2 citizens speak, and both of them were from the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and apparently sometime, I'm guessing between the June, or maybe it was a little before the June meeting, and this meeting on June, the regularly scheduled June meeting and the June 28th meeting, there must have been an incident with a student either bullying or creating hate speech against LGBT students, and it was addressed by the school board, but they were speaking about how they they wish the school board had addressed it better. And the first speaker was Gabby Fernandez, and her initial address was that there had been hate speech. I'm guessing hate speech because I don't know what the incident was. They kept talking about an LGBT incident that had occurred at the school, within the school district. And I know it was a 3-minute rule, and that was probably why they weren't as specific. But I kind of wish one of the board members had addressed or had commented so that people who may not have been familiar with the situation knew what they were talking about. But I'm guessing there was an incident of hate speech against either the LGBT group or a specific LGBT student. And from the way they were addressing it, I'm guessing it happened on social media. So, again, this is all assumptions because I can only go off of what they said. But they addressed the fact that the campuses should be considered safe spaces for all students. And as I said, the initial speaker, Gabby Fernandez, had mentioned that she was bothered seeing Trump flags being shown on campuses, and she was worried that students, especially students who Trump supporters may not approve of, may feel endangered by those supporters. So she was concerned for the safety of all students. And she appreciated that the school board had released a statement, but felt the statement needed to be stronger. And then she was followed by Ashley De La Rosa, also from Dolores Huerta's Foundation, and she too had addressed an incident earlier this month. The board, and basically said that the board needs to create an environment of acceptance for all students, specifically LGBT students. And then they went through, because the Dolores Huerta Foundation works with students that may be, I'm trying to think of a good term. To me it seems that they work more with students who are not necessarily fairly treated. So LGBT students of color, and they act as a representation for those students. And one of the things that they had done following this incident was they had sat down with a group of students who addressed themselves as allies for LGBT students, and went over things that they would like to see more of within the schools, such as safe spaces where LGBT students can go to talk if something happens, i.e. if they're bullied, they have a safe space to go and address that situation, similar to what a lot of the college campuses have, where they have a specific location that students can go to and talk to people. So they asked about, they talked about having more involvement with the parents, more involvement with the school district in making sure all students feel safe and accepted on campuses. And then there was brought forth a public request from Salem Palmer, which he brought forth a group of students from Centennial High School as part of Project Citizen. And they actually brought forth, they wanted to see more student representation on the high school, on the current high school district. And one of the things that they talked about, they wanted the student to actually have a vote within the school district. Essentially, they brought forth a proposal, came up with a plan. They had done surveys with multiple high schools, multiple students. I believe they said they actually surveyed over 1,300. They surveyed 1,300 students to get kind of an idea of exactly what students would like to see, of how they can be represented within the school district. And some of the things that they talked about was, again, having a student as a voting member of the current high school district. how the school district seemed to like the idea of having a student representing and being a voting member. And one of the things that they discussed was at what grade level should they become that voting member. Should it be a senior, should it be a junior, should it be somebody maybe even a sophomore. But they were definitely leaning more toward junior senior, and a lot of the board members were saying, well, why not a senior, because the students initially said junior, because junior, that way they'd get the first year of experience and then the second year. Next topic after the Project Citizen students that they spoke at length about was they brought up Brandy Ball to present the school dashboard indicator and show where we are at according to California state standards. And then they did they went over the Williams uniform complaint. They said no, because there's a current lawsuit, or as a result of the Williams lawsuit, which I needed to look up. I don't know what it is yet. I need to look it up still, so I understand what that was. But as of this quarter, they've had no complaints. So, and then they left it at that. And then they did and the next big topic they talked about was the current implementing an ethnic studies program. Essentially, they did kind of a background of how ethnic studies originated, which they talked about. It originated at UC Berkeley in 1968, and then they gave kind of a course description that was that they were creating based off of feedback of a committee of various teachers, parents, teachers and parents. And then they explained why we should be teaching ethnic studies, which I know ethnic studies nationally is kind of a disputed topic, whether it should be being taught or not. I think I agree with them. I do think it should be being taught. And so for me, this is kind of one of those topics that is important to know, because we have so much going on culturally in the last, it's even greater than the last, it's been going on for centuries, and we study it as a topic in college, and it's only a topic in college either if you want to take it as an elective or you are focusing on an ethnic topic for your major. But it's something that needs to be discussed, especially in the past year with Black Lives Matter. And then, as I said earlier, this has been going on for so much longer than just Black Lives Matter. We're talking Rodney King, if you want to go back that far. But in the last 5 years alone, just so much has happened where we need to be discussing this. And then they also went into looking at the curriculum. They're discussing the idea of once this curriculum gets approved, having it eventually become a graduation requirement that all students will be required to take an ethnic studies class prior to graduation for Kern High School District. And then they also discussed that it should maybe, instead of it being taught like as junior, because they talked about possibly doing it as a junior senior type of course, or maybe even teaching it earlier. That way students have a greater understanding going into high school itself. So, starting freshman year, taking an ethnic studies course will greatly help even just a freshman understand, especially if they're a freshman coming from a small school, who may not have had a lot of integration with other ethnic communities. And then, give me a moment. They discussed the superintendent salaries, contracts, the allowances for the superintendents. Then they talked about fund usage for Measure K, they open and close they did a public hearing on continuing the usage of Cisco Ventura for their beverage and concession vending services, and then talked a little bit about adding a pedestrian easement access for Del Oro High School, as well as a traffic right-of-way easement. And then they also did a report updating the review of a solar usage program. And one of the things that I took away was they had an overall net savings of $30 million on electricity because of this. And then they also voted in the adoption of the annual budget. So essentially for me, what it looked like overall is they do where the public can speak and bring up things that they think the school board should be addressing. And then they have planned topics that they're going to discuss. So like curriculum updates, how they're going to update the curriculum, budget. They did some things like they talk about reports, but it never really got discussed because they had no topics for that report. So it feels like there's topics of report that may not have been talked about, but they cover. So overall, to me, it's an interesting process to actually get to watch the school board meeting, because thinking about how we as citizens are always, oh, well, where does all this school, how do we come up with this? Where did this come from? Well, that we have meetings, we have the school board meeting. It looks like it's public and anybody can go, and you can get a hold of the meeting. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I do apologize. They did discuss, they kind of discussed the meeting minutes briefly. They would talk about stuff they had done in previous meeting minutes. So if we have school board availability to us and we can go in, the school board they have a website. Our current high school has a website. You can go in, you can look at the meeting minutes. Although for me, it was a little hard to pull up the meeting minutes and actually get to read them. They were a little confusing to me. But you can pull up what was discussed at previous meetings. You can see everything. I'm trying to think. I downloaded the presentations. Some of the presentations. I wished the Project Citizen presentation had been in there, but that one was not available. As I would have loved to have read more in depth about that one, because the students are trying to add their voice. And I would have loved to have seen all the work they did on that one. They had the ethnic studies. You can look up the actual ethnic studies presentation that they showed. And if you object to it, you can see what they did, how it looks. Everything is laid out in a presentation. You can go ahead, you can research everything that was talked about at a previous meeting, and then, bring it, you can go into the next school board meeting and address it. Because they have the first part of the meeting is public hearing, where anybody can talk. Now, given you might want to make sure your information can be discussed within 3 minutes, but if you want your voice heard, you have the opportunity to have your voice heard. Okay, thank you.